right, we're on chapter 14. Chapter 14. Ooh, crumbs on the book. Crumbs on my table. Goodness. Okay. Chapter 14. In which is heard a voice in the forest. Jimmy could hear Prince Brat following in his tracks step by step. He grimly pressed on. Brambles reaching out like cat's claws tore at their fine garments. The forest trees rose all around them like prison bars. Finally, Jimmy spun around. "Lay off! Go your own way!" "This way suits me," said the prince. "Well, don't follow me. I have no more idea than a gnat where I'm heading. "Silence," whispered the prince with a turn of his head. "Hear that?" They froze, the two of them. A voice came wailing through the woods. "Tunia! Petunia!" And then a young woman appeared, barefoot and jangling with bracelets. She moved through the trees as quickly as a wood spirit. Petunia!" She carried a coiled rope in one hand and held outstretched in the other an amber chunk of comb honey. "Come here, darling. Come to Betsy." Suddenly, as if sensing a presence in the trees, she headed toward Jimmy and the prince. "Petunia, you there? Naughty rascal. Smell the honey. Come feast yourself, pet." Jimmy didn't know what to make of this girl, really, for as she drew closer, he reckoned she couldn't be more than 14 or 15 years old. He stepped out into full view with the prince clinging to him like a shadow. "Miss?" She stopped short. "My eyes! Who are you?" "Lost," said Jimmy. Would you know which way to the river?" "Course I do. Ain't we heading for the fair, me and Petunia? Have you seen him?" "Petunia?" "Got loose, he did. My dancing bear. World famous." "Scared me out of my skin," Jimmy replied and pointed. "Back there." She turned on her heels and started off. "Hey," Jimmy shouted, "where's the river?" "Where it's always been, due south." "Which way is south?" Betsy paused to set her arm like a signpost. "Straight on." "You certain?" "Certain, I'm certain. Didn't Pa always say I had a head like a compass? Rest him in peace." And she was gone. Their clothes were ripped to tatters by late morning when Jimmy and the prince caught sight of the sparkling river, and almost at once they dove back into cover. Mounted on high-stepping horses, a pair of soldiers were advancing along the river road. "They must be out searching for you," Jimmy whispered. "If they catch me with you, I'm done for." Prince Brat didn't seem to be listening. His eyes were fixed on the passing soldiers. "Look here," Jimmy muttered impatiently. "I can't have you sticking to me like a barnacle. Ain't you had a snoutful of running away? Go back with the soldiers." The prince shook his head. "Let them pass." And then he added with the faintest of smiles, "This is the first time no one has had fits because I got my clothes grimy. The ladies keep me clean and starched as a pillowcase. But you're a prince. Is my face dirty as yours? You don't belong knocking about outside the walls." Prince Brat gazed off into the distance. "Did you have lots of friends when you lived on the streets?" "Heaps. Heaps, of course. And hardly a one of them wouldn't fight me over a bone. Go back. Your pa must be having double fits of worry." The prince answered with a flash of resentment. "I might as well be stuffed and hung on the wall like a stag's head for all he notices me." "You remind him often enough with all your pranks. How long are you going to let him sweat and stew?" "I don't know," declared the prince. "Maybe I'll never go back. This is the best time I ever had." "God," Jimmy murmured. Chapter 15 of the Hot Potato Man and Other Matters. The soldiers had passed by. Following the river, Jimmy ventured toward the city. Prince Brat strode along beside him. "Soon as I can, I aim to give you the slip," Jimmy warned. "You'll be on your own." The prince said nothing. The tide was low, and they traveled out of sight of the road, below a grassy embankment. In the distance, against billowing white clouds, stood a jack-straw jumble of ship's mast. "You can fend for your own self, can't you?" Jimmy asked suddenly. "Of course I can," answered the prince in a stinging voice. "I don't need flocks of servants to fetch and carry for me." "It's settled then." "Settled. Skip off any time you like." With the tide out, a wide mud flat lay exposed. From long habit, Jimmy kept his eyes peeled for treasure. Sandpipers scattered like mice before him. He spotted a barrel stave and pounced upon it. "Trash," remarked the prince. "What are you doing?" "Mudlarking." "What?" "I've got to eat, don't I? If I can collect enough driftwood, I can sell it as firewood." The prince shrugged and walked on ahead. Jimmy gazed after him for a moment. What did a prince know about living off the streets? His meals had always appeared on china plates and silver trays as if by magic. Left to himself, he'd starve. "It's not my worry," Jimmy muttered. "What?" "You, that's what. If you get hungry enough, you'll scramble back to the castle." The prince glared back at Jimmy and then stooped down to retrieve the broken leg of a chair from the mud. "Is this worth anything?" Jimmy nodded. Before long, the two of them had collected 3 more barrel staves in the back of the chair. Then Jimmy found something even more valuable to him, a bent and battered bird cage. He could go into business with that. Straightened out, it would hold rats. They rounded a bend, and the crack of a whip sounded in the air like a firecracker. Jimmy crawled up the embankment for a look. A weary old coach was mired with mudhole on the road. The coachman, looking just as old and rickety, held the reins of his 2-horse team and cracked his whip in the air again. "Pull, gents! Be good lads. It's me own fault not leading you around this bog. Me eyesight ain't what it was, is it, old tars?" Jimmy watched for another moment as the horses tried to pull the coach free. The coach was enameled blue with yellow lettering painted on the door panel. "Captain Harry Nips, Hot Potato Man." Jimmy crawled over the embankment. A ride to the city would suit him fine. "Sir, would you take on a passenger? Here, let me set these barrel staves under the wheels." "Don't mind if you do," said Captain Nips. "I'm late for the fair as it is." Jimmy busied himself laying a firm track for the wheels. Prince Brat watched from the edge of the embankment. "You must be carrying a heavy load," Jimmy cried out. "Try again, Captain." The old man cracked his whip, the horses strained, and the coach rolled up out of the bog. "Hop in, lad." Jimmy opened the door and saw that the coach was heavily loaded with raw potatoes and a huge iron kettle. Jimmy settled himself as best he could, and the coach lurched forward. At last, Jimmy thought, "You're free of the prince," but he couldn't resist a backward glance. Prince Brat was standing in the center of the road. He dropped his load of driftwood and merely gazed at the receding coach. Jimmy straightened and folded his arms. The prince wasn't his lookout any longer, but he'd stood there like a wounded bird. Blast him! A prince hadn't a cockeyed notion how to fend for himself. "Stop, Captain!" Jimmy shouted. "We left me friend behind." The hot potato man pulled up on his reins. Jimmy leaned out a window. With an arm, he motioned Prince Brat to come along. For an instant, Jimmy thought he saw a smile flash across the prince's face, but it had vanished. By the time the heir to the throne joined him inside the coach, they rode in silence. Jimmy wondered what had possessed him to refer to Prince Brat as his friend. Friend? Cows would give beer first. Then, minutes later, the coach rocked to a sudden halt. "Stand and deliver!" came a shout. A pair of highwaymen were training pistols on Captain Nips. Jimmy hardly had to peer out. The voice was familiar. It was Hold Your Nose Billy and Cutwater.